وانفعنا بالقرآن والذكر الحكيم اللهم انفعنا بما علمتنا وعلمنا بما ينفعنا وزدنا علما يقربنا منك برحمتك يا أرحم الراحمين اللهم لا سهل إلا ما جعلته سهلا وأنت يا حي يا قيوم تجعل الحزن إذا شئت سهلا سهلا اللهم أعذنا من شرور أنفسنا ومن سيئات أعمالنا واصلح لنا شأننا كله لا إله إلا أنت نستغفرك ونتوب إليك وصلى الله على سيدنا محمد وآله وصحبه وسلم وبعد فقال المؤلف حجة الإسلام الإمام الغزالي رحمه الله ونفعنا به وبكم وأما الكبر فاعلم أنه خاطر في رفع النفس واستعظامها. So as for arrogance, so dealing with the four cardinal sicknesses of the heart. Imam al-Ghazali rahimahullah reduced all of the sicknesses of the heart and diseases of the heart to four, which everything could be reduced back to. So the fourth one, arrogance, he says. As for arrogance, it is a thought in the mind that you want to elevate yourself. It's a thought in the mind that you want to elevate yourself and to isti'zam, to look at yourself as something big. To look at yourself as something azim. That is what kibr is. Kibr. As the Prophet said, Man kana fi qalbihi mithqalu dharratin min kibr, he will not enter Jannah, the one whoever has one grain of kibr in his heart. He will not enter Jannah. And what takabbur ittiba'uha. What's takabbur? Similarly, is something that comes from kibr. Often just used interchangeably, can be just used interchangeably, kibr or takabbur, can be just used the same meaning, but slight difference. Kibr, so at least takabbur, thinking that you're better than others, because now you're elevating yourself above others. وتواضع خاطر في وضع النفس واستحقارها. And what is tawadu? The opposite of kibr. Tawadu is to be humble. Humble is a thought process in which you want to put down yourself and to look at yourself as something low. وَالتَّوَاضُعُ أَتْبَعُهُ. It must be a mistake, isn't it? I've got tawadu both times, but has anyone got the Arabic?
No, for humbleness. Tawadu and inkisari.
What's the first one? You had inkisar? The first one was tawadu, the second one was inkisar.
Yeah.
Okay. Mine says tawadu again, but it must be a mistake. Well, inkisar atba'uhu, have you got?
Yeah, just humbleness, inkisari.
ولكل واحد منهما عامي وخاصي. So each of these, for arrogance and for humbleness, there is a general type and a special type. So it's interesting that Imam al-Ghazali rahimahullah, he puts all of these things back to thought processes. Ultimately, all of these things arise as thoughts, they're thought processes. Khatir, it takes it back to khawatir. There's a lot of psychologists have these discussions, about things like, for example, mood depression, mood disorders, depression, anxiety, things like that. So people who practice cognitive behavioral therapies, they say that all these emotions, are all linked to cognitions, to thoughts. So if we can change the thought processes, then we can change people's mood as well and behavior. So, for example, with depressed people, they found on analysing them closely many types of thought processes that you don't find in people who are not depressed. And those thought processes are to do with like negative thoughts, things like that. So, whereas if something happens to someone who's not depressed, they may think about it in a certain way. A depressed person will think about it in a different way, in a very negative way. So then cognitive therapy, they try to just look at those thought processes and try to change them back into the thought process you would normally have if you weren't depressed, for example. So that's interesting that Imam al-Ghazali, our scholars, they also picked up this thing, that these things are to do with thought processes. فالتواضع العامل هو الاكتفاء بالدور من الملبس والمسكن والمركب والتكبر في مقابلته الترفع عن ذلك. So remember we said there was a general level and a special level for these things. The general level of humbleness is to just be content with not having many fine clothing, housing, transport. These things that we normally have, which we do need, but if you're humble, then you don't mind having humble clothes, humble abode, and humble means of transport. Whereas the arrogant person, he will want to have things where he feels, now I'm above others. So he'll want to drive, a flashy car, have a big house. So you can say, I'm better than my neighbours, I'm better than my relatives, I've got a bigger house, things like that. These are just signs, because what is in the heart is always manifest in the limbs. You will want to wear designer clothing, things like that. But probably you don't need some of those things, we don't need some of those extra luxurious items. If we paid half the price or had half of it, we'd probably get something of similar quality even maybe, but sometimes people pay just for a brand, for example, or for whatever, just it's to do with takabbur sometimes. It's not saying it's different if someone wants to spend more money to buy something for better quality. But then be careful, it's a fine line, Are you really doing it for that reason, or is it really because you're just tricking yourself? So it's a fine line. And this is where a lot of people get caught out. A lot of people get caught out, including people who are supposed to be more elevated in spiritual states, or who have progressed more, let's say. These are the ways that they can get tricked by Shaitan. So Shaitan's not going to come to them and say, you need to get the really good clothes, really expensive clothes because you want to show off in front of your peers. Because that person's now he's more progressed. That he's not going to just fall for that. He's going to say, no, that's arrogance. I don't want to do that. I'm trying to combat that thing. So what Shaitan will say to him, he say, look, you're a sheikh now, or you're a talib al-ilm now. People look at you to set an example. If you wear fine clothes, that would be good for da'wah. You're a da'i now. Right? You're doing da'wah, you're representing Islam, you need to wear good clothes, which is true. To a certain extent, it's true. Even Imam al-Ghazali himself mentions that in some areas, So people are involved in da'wah, they have to be presentable, and the Prophet ﷺ was presentable as well, obviously. But you see then how that can spiral out of control. So, start buying £1,000 shoes, you know, Italian leather shoes or something. The finest clothes, you know, handmade in Morocco or things like that. Whatever, I mean, it's a fine, all I'm saying is a fine line, you know. So that's why you used to find in the past, when sheikhs used to train their students, they would often say to them, no, you know, you don't wear any good, you just wear, you know, wear rags, wear patches on your clothes, or, you know, things like that, just to train them. Because the person, it's very hard for us to train ourselves, actually. It's quite difficult, you know. And especially when you can fall into these subtle, traps. It's very difficult. So that's why often a student that was with a sheikh, especially for tarbiyah, they would go through a phase where the sheikh would make them, you know, instruct them, you know. You need to stop wearing these type of extra smart clothes, and just go and dress in, you know, something obviously clean, but something simple. That's in fact why one of the theories why people were called Sufis, because they used to wear suf, wool, which was considered a very humble type of material. So that's the thing. So if we find arrogance within ourselves because of our clothing, we should then stop wearing that clothing. Yeah? Because at the present, at all times, it's more important for us to save ourselves than to think about saving other people. You know? Don't worry about saving all the other people that you need to do da'wah. First, save ourselves. You know? So the sheikhs in the past, they used to do that training with their students, you know, make them do khidmah, you know, make them serve in the zawiyah or the madrasa, clean up, you know, clean the toilets. All these things were there to make the person humble, because it goes against what the nafs wants to do. And that's actually the way to train ourselves to become humble, you know. Is actually to do things which sort of break the nafs, break the pride. And when we keep doing them again and again, then then it doesn't become so difficult for us. That means then we're getting to some levels of being humble. Even there, then more subtle dangers come in, like the ones I'm mentioning, you know, and other ones such as obviously then feeling conceited about being humble. So you acting humble then starts making you feel inside, feeling proud of yourself or conceited, you know, that type of thing as well. But still, to act humble, even if you're not feeling it inside, even if it's better than to act arrogant and feel arrogant, you know. So acting humble but feeling arrogant is better than acting arrogant and feeling arrogant, if you see what I mean. Because it's one stage, you know, at least you're stepping in the right direction. True humbleness will only come into the heart when it has ma'rifah. True humbleness will come with ma'rifah, because ma'rifah means to know the power of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala upon us and our weakness in front of Him. So then that's true humbleness comes into the heart that way. But when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala sees us making this type of effort, you know, for His, to come closer to Him and to humble ourselves, then He will in return help us by giving us this ma'rifah and this true humbleness into our heart, you know. وتواضع الخاسي هو تمرين النفس على قبول الحق ممن كان واضعا أو شريفا. What is the special form of being humble, or the special way to get humbleness? He says it's to train oneself to accept the truth from others. To train oneself to accept the truth from others, even if we feel they are lower than us or higher than us. Lower than us or higher than us. والتكبر في مقابله يترفع عن ذلك وهو معصية كبيرة وخطيئة عظيمة. Takabbur is the opposite to that. Arrogance is the opposite to that. So unable to accept the truth from someone who is lower than you, and even from people who are higher than you. If someone becomes very arrogant, they will not even accept the truth even for someone higher because of their arrogance. And this is a huge state of sinfulness, this type of arrogance, when you're unable to then accept the truth. Because accepting the truth is, is accepting the truth is obligatory upon us. The truth is the deen of Islam. So notice he says tamreen nafs, training oneself. So once again, indicating here this may be something that is difficult for the nafs, difficult for one's ego, but we have to force ourselves, train ourselves. Just like if, for example, we want to, we're told, wash the dishes, in the madrasa or the zabe or whatever, or the masjid, wash the dishes, the sheikh says to you. You find it difficult. I've never washed dishes in my whole life. But you force yourself and go through that painful experience of doing something you don't want to do. Then the next time you do it, a bit easier. The next time you do it, it's a bit easier. Next time you do it, it's a bit. Finally, you'll find, it's not a problem. So similarly with, with all type of changing oneself, it's the same type of procedure. So here again, if we find this arrogance, we have to then train ourselves. So when you're in discussions with people, and then say it gets a bit into a type of debate or something, or even an argument, what you notice with people, they everyone wants to have the last word, don't they? Everyone wants to have the last word. So there, the training for you is don't have the last word. Just leave it. Keep silent and walk off. Or that's the training there, and that's how we have to train ourselves. Because having the last word in that argument or that debate is simply nothing other than arrogance. Because you've already made your point. If there was a valid point to be made, has already been made. That person has already made their valid points. You're obviously not going to come to an agreement here. You have nothing new to add, but you want to have the last word. So having the last word is nothing other than your ego unable to just tolerate the fact that that person has had the last word against you, without you getting something back. You're unable to tolerate that because of your arrogance. So this is how we can start training ourselves, because we'll find ourselves in these type of situations all the time. Maybe with your Muslim brother or sister or your wife, or, it could be with anyone, work colleagues. Anyway, it will happen all the time. It's our nature as human beings. People will always be trying to put their egos upon other people. But that's the type of thing people are. Not many people are on a spiritual path, trying to purify themselves, or trying to become humble. And we've already discussed about this whole culture now. It's all about actually the opposite, to try to make people become more and more arrogant. So you're not going to find many people who are trying to be humble. So you'll have plenty of opportunity to practice this, put this into practice. Plenty of opportunity. So here, the crucial thing is to remember, you don't need to get revenge for yourself. if the matter is something concerning Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala or the Prophet or the deen, there you have a right to then, feel anger for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And that's not a time when we should be humble. Because that's not humbleness, that's actually cowardice at that time. If the debate or whatever is to do with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala or the deen. Yeah? But if it's something to do with yourself, when I say about the deen, I don't mean, if someone is insulting this deen or something, I don't mean it's a debate about the deen, that's once again could be your ego involved. Because we find often that amongst Muslims who are supposed to be like studying and things like that, they start having discussions and everyone's trying to show how much knowledge they have. So that's once again becomes about ego. Yeah? I've had that many times. With these type of they start as a discussion, become more like a debate, it become more like an ego thing. The person doesn't want to withdraw from their position. Or it could be anything, it could be a fiqh, could be a hadith, could be anything. At this time, once you've made your point, you can just, you don't need to continue. Let the person have the last say, if they want to, because you've made your point, you're not going to gain anything from just now escalating that into an argument or just going on and on. So that's once again to do with leaving it, Let the person have the last word. It will be hard for the nafs, it will be hard for the ego, but that's the training. That's what we do it for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. You do it for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala at that point. Because that's how you're going to get humble. That's how you get humble in front of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is putting these opportunities or these tests for us. That's why these situations arise. They're opportunities or tests, We claim to be humble, let's see, are you really humble? Or opportunity, you want to train yourself, here's your opportunity now. So, but, obviously if someone, so you look at it, is it a personal thing, If someone has insulted you personally, you don't need to get revenge or anything, that's ego then, you know what I mean? Sometimes it can be to do with honor, which is different as well. Honor. If someone insult your honor, then you do have a right to then feel anger as well. But that's slightly different. But if it's just a strictly personal thing, you just want to get revenge, you don't need to. You can forgive as well. Okay, so that's one of the best ways to train oneself to become humble, is in our interaction with other people. So accepting the truth from those who are higher than you and lower than you as well. Sometimes there may be people that you feel they're not on your level, let's say, in some way or another in society or something like that. But they have knowledge which you don't have. To get that knowledge from them, you have to then become humble as well. Because especially in our tradition, the aspect of getting knowledge from someone is then it's like a student-teacher relationship. It's quite, the student is humble in front of the teacher, and has a lot of respect for the teacher. So we noticed this in Syria as well. When a lot of people from here went to Syria to study the deen, they had it in their heads that they're going to study with like big shuyukh out there. Shaykh Ridhwan Saleem, al-Bouti, or some of the big names, which was an unrealistic expectation, because those people have got thousands of students already, and much more advanced students than someone who just come from England who can't barely speak Arabic. You see what I mean? And some of the students did find it difficult to then just go to, learn their basics from just normal, humble people that could teach them the basics and who would have time to teach them as well. Because they had this whole sort of, fantasy about I study with so Shaykh, and things like that. When they come back, they'll they can claim they have this connection to this big Shaykh. Yeah. So these are the sort of things where one has to humble oneself. I studied my fiqh, al-Lubab, Hanafi fiqh, with a Shaykh who was 22 years old. Shaykh Mur'i al-Rashid. Hafizullah, may Allah protect him, mashallah, very knowledgeable, young Shaykh. He graduated from Minhaj al-Fath, one of the highest in his graduating class. And but he was 22. I was in my 30s. And it did cross my mind, so this brother so young, and here I am, a doctor from England and advanced. But alhamdulillah, and I benefited so much from him. Studied the whole book within a few months, because he had time. He came to our house every day, give us good 3-4 hours every day of just reading that text. So you can imagine the benefit of getting, and his knowledge was amazing, mashallah. So that's all the type of things we have to. These are the type of situations we'll find, because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will give these tests or opportunities for us all the time. ثم حسن التواضع العامي أن تذكر مبدأك ومنتهاك وما أنت عليه في الحال من ضروب الآفات والأقدار، كما قال بعضهم أولك نطفة مذرة وآخرك جيفة قذرة وأنت بينهما حامل عذرة. So it says then the fortress, the fortress of keeping yourself in a state of humility at the general level, at the army level, at the general level, is to always reflect and remember upon our beginnings and our ends. And even your current state. If you look carefully at your own current state, that will also lead to humility, And so when we recite the Quran, this was the importance of having a daily recitation of Quran with meaning. Very important to recite Quran with meaning, which I always go on about it, but because I always still see people reciting lots of Quran just in the Arabic. I see brothers are spending hours actually reciting the Quran in Arabic who don't understand it. It's just so important to read the English with it as well. Because what is the Quran? Hudan lil muttaqin. It's a guidance. It's a guidance. It's a risala. It's a message. So, because by reading the Quran, this was reminding us of where we came from. Nutfa. We were just a drop of sperm. Really, in reality, each one of us was actually a drop of sperm. Not so very long ago. And before that we were nothing. هَلَ عَلَى الْإِنسَانِ حِينٌ مِنَ الدَّهْرِ لَمْ يَكُنْ شَيْئًا مَذْكُورًا. Has not there come a time upon human being that he was something that was not remembered, something that was unknown, something that did not exist, and then you were just a drop of sperm, and so then the stage is so it's important, and the Quran is sending us back. Many ayahs in the Quran that bring us back to our origins, to make us reflect. Allah created you from clay, and now obviously, as you know, scientists, they say, all of the stuff that human beings are made of can be found in clay, all the ingredients. So literally we're made of clay, And then we were babies, have no knowledge, have nothing, no power, can't look after ourselves. You know, the Quran reminds us of that as well. When you were babies, you know, you had no knowledge, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala takes care of you, and then when you become fully grown, then you become all arrogant and rebellious to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And the Quran also then reminds us where you're going to go. Then you're going to get old, and you're going to become senile, and you're going to become like the baby you were before. This is inevitable actually. It's not just people, it doesn't happen to just people who have dementia. Eventually it happens to every human being if they live long enough. Because it's actually the natural process of the brain, the aging of the brain. You know? And obviously people are spending millions and billions, scientists, trying to find ways that they could stop this process, but they haven't, you know, come across anything. It's natural. The body is actually, a lot of people don't realize that the body is actually designed to last about 70 years. Yeah? That's why after that time people's hearts start slowing down, their brains start slowing down, their judgment becomes slowed down. All of these things, they're inevitable. Some people will happen at different stages as they get older. You know, you'll find some people who are 80 that have still got very good memories and everything, but definitely their judgment, reflexes will be slowed down. You know, these things will just happen as time goes on. And eventually, if they live long enough, everyone will go back to that stage of, you know, not even being able to look after themselves again like when they were babies. And the Prophet ﷺ used to actually make dua, protection against going back to that stage, you know, and had him from senile old age, where one cannot even look after themselves again. It's terrible in a way. I mean, it's terrible, but that's what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has made reality, to make us reflect, to understand, to make us be humble. You know? I told you about my professor. I used to have in university, medical school, there was a professor, liver specialist. And King's College is considered one of the world's leading centres for liver studies. And he was one of the big professors there, and he was teaching us. He said, you know, the one thing he feared most in his life is that he's going to lose all of that knowledge when he gets old. You know? So you should do all these things like take one aspirin every day to keep his blood thinned out. You know, to hope that he won't get strokes and things, even though there was at that time no evidence for doing that, you know. So you see a lot of people in this society, you know, going at extreme lengths to try to prevent themselves from getting into that type of senile old age and having illnesses and things like that, you know. A lot of people who try to live healthy lifestyles. It's all about fear of illness and disease. You know? But it's an inevitable thing. How long are you going to live? You know? The human being is just like, doesn't think, how long are you going to live? I did this with the children at our secondary school, you know, in the assembly. I was saying to them, look, how long can you live for? 100, 110, 120, 130? You're not going to get to 130. Yeah? It's going to end, you know. Like it says in the Quran, يَوَدُّ أَحَدُهُمْ أَنْ يُعَمَّرُ أَلْفَ سَنَةٍ. Speaking about the Yahud, who specifically have a very strong desire for this worldly life. It says, you know, one of them wishes that he could live for 1,000 years. وَمَا هُوَ بِمُزَحْزَحِهِ مِنَ الْعَذَابِ. Even if he wants to live for 1,000 years, that's still not going to prevent the inevitable, the punishment of the hellfire. So that's the reality of us as human beings. So that's what the Quran does, always then putting us back into a state of reflection, which will lead to being humble in front of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So that's what Imam al-Ghazali is saying. Reflect upon where you've come from, reflect upon where you're ending up, where you're going to. And even now, look at what type of tribulations you're in, what type of uncleanliness you are in, even now. If you reflect upon your state, as one of them said, the beginning of you is a drop of sperm, and the end of you is a rotten corpse. You know, all of us are going to end up as a stinking dead body. And right between that, you're someone who's carrying around feces. You know? Imagine, what's inside our intestines. We'll be carrying around, and that's enough to make us humble. You know? وحسن التواضع الخاسي هو ذكر عقوبة العادل عن الحق المتمادي في الباطل فهذه جملة كافية لمن استبصر. So then the fortress of having the special type of humbleness rather than the general type is to always keep in mind the type of punishment that comes upon those who deviate from the straight path. And what is the end of those people who are arrogant? What is their state in this life and in the next life? Because even in this life there will be in all sorts of different types of tribulations. And in the next life there will be in worse situations. So he says, and this is enough of an exposition for those people who have insight. So this here ends that chapter on the four cardinal, I think you could call them the four cardinal diseases of the heart and the four cardinal virtues. A really valuable chapter. It's really valuable in the way he's then able to bring it down to those four core things that we can really work on. Rather than mentioning 90 things and overwhelming people. It's very useful in that sense. Any questions on that before we move to the next chapter? الفصل الخامس البطن وحفظه. So the fifth section is on the stomach and protecting the stomach. So we're still here on the guarding of the limbs, the guarding of the members of the body. If you remember, it started with the eye, the ear, etc. Went to the heart, and now it's gone to the stomach. ثم عليك بحفظ البطن وإصلاحه. It's good we did this chapter after Eid. Yeah? So we can look back now and say, oh, obviously I won't do that again. So, guarding of the stomach. فإنه أشق الأعضاء إصلاحا على المجتهد وأكثرها مؤنة وشغلا وأعظمها أثرا وضررا لأنه المنبع والمعدن. So this is the most difficult of the members of the body to rectify for the mujtahid. For the mujtahid meaning the one who is in mujahada, not obviously doesn't mean in the fiqh sense of mujtahid, but mujtahid in the sense of the person who is striving and struggling in the path of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Why? Not because it's the most dangerous, but because it's the one that's always present with us. So it's like a constant struggle that we have to go about, to control the appetite of the stomach. With some of the other appetites, there will come certain occasions will arise, where you could fulfill some of those appetites, and then you have to control those appetites, But with the stomach, it's with us all the time, as the nature of human being. That's why fasting is one of the best forms of ibadah as well, because it's a constant ibadah. The whole day you're constantly preventing yourself from those desires of the stomach. eating and drinking. So those people who are striving in the spiritual path, who have gone through some of those preliminary stages of tawbah from major sins and trying to control their tongue and those things, then it becomes important for them also to look at what they're intaking into their body in terms of food and drink. And obviously there's two levels which he's going to talk about, which is, the first level is for everyone, which is avoiding haram, and the second level is for those who are making more of a struggle to come closer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And also the stomach is the greatest, has one of the greatest effects on all other limbs as well. Because it is the manba and the ma'dan, it's like the origin. He explains later what he means by that. وَمِنْهُ تَهَيُّجُ الْأُمُورِ فِي الْأَعْضَاءِ. If the stomach is full, then the other limbs or the other members of the body feel more strength, to occupy themselves in things that they maybe don't need to occupy themselves in. Either in just entertainment or even worse in things which are makruh or haram. Whereas if the stomach is empty, then the other members of the body don't have that capacity, that strength. You've seen when people are fasting, when we're fasting, we don't feel we can do much. Because the stomach is then empty. So people feel difficult to work or even things like that. من قوة وضعف وعفة وجماع ونحوه. So when the stomach is full and it's got energy, the other members of the body have energy for other appetites, other shahawat, sexual appetite is increased. This is why the Prophet ﷺ said for people who are not married, one of the recommendations is to fast more. Keep more fast if you're not married, so that particular appetite is also reduced when it's supposed to instead of fasting. فَعَلَيْكَ إِذَنْ بِصِيَانَتِهِ عَنِ الْحَرَامِ وَشُبْهَةِ أَوَّلًا. So the first step, he said, is to protect the stomach from haram and shubha. Things which are obviously forbidden or things which are doubtful. ثم عن فضول الحلال ثانيا. And then for the person who wants to then, like we said, the person who's making a spiritual purification, they have to then restrict also the amount of food, not to fill themselves up every time they eat. إن كانت لك همة في عبادة الله. أما الحرام والشبهة فإنما يلزمك لثلاثة أمور. As for the first stage of staying away from haram and doubtful things, then there's three matters which make this obligatory upon you. أولها حذرا من نار جهنم. First of all, obviously, if we eat haram or doubtful things, it can lead us into the punishment of the hellfire. قال الله سبحانه وتعالى إن الذين يأكلون أموال اليتامى ظلما إنما يأكلون في بطونهم نارا وسيصلون سعيرا. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, those who eat the wealth of orphans wrongfully, they eat nothing but fire into their bellies, and they will burn. They will be burnt in the hellfire. وقال النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم كل لحم نبت من سحت فالنار أولى به. The Prophet صلى الله عليه وسلم said, any meat that grows upon the haram or yes, then the fire is more deserving of it. Any meat, meaning the meat of our bodies, if we nourish and sustain ourselves on haram, then the hellfire is more deserving of it. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala protect us. والثاني أن أهل الحرام وشبهة مطرود لا يوفق للعبادة. Secondly, the person who eats haram, he will also then be not given tawfiq for ibadah from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. إذ لا يصلح لخدمة الله تعالى. This is someone who's not on the befitting to be in the khidmah of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Or إذ لا يصلح لخدمة الله تعالى إلا كل طاهر مطهر. إلا كل طاهر مطهر. Only the purified people are those who are deserving or rightfully in the worship of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. قلت أنا أليس الله تعالى قد منع الجنوب من الدخول إلى بيتي. So Imam al-Ghazali says, don't you see that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has forbidden the junub to go into the masjid? The person who's in major impurities, janaba, is forbidden from entering into the house of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Because why? Because he's impure. وَالْمُحْدَث عَنْ مَسِّ كِتَابِ. The person who is in muhdath, who has minor impurity, is not allowed to touch the book of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Why? Because of their impurity once again. قال عز من قائل. ولا جنبا إلى عابر سبيل حتى تغتسلوا. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said that the person who's junub in janaba should not enter should not enter the masjid unless they're just passing through. So there is actually a ruling in the fiqh because of this ayah of Quran that if you're in major janaba but you have to just pass through the masjid, it's like to go through to, there's two entrances, to get through to where you wouldn't want to go, then you're allowed to pass through. Otherwise you can't go in the masjid to just do ibadah and things like that, or for any other reason. وقال تعالى لا يمسه إلا المطهرون. This is the ayah which is the proof of having wudu for Quran, that none must touch it except those who are purified. Surah Al-Waqi'ah 79.
I assume here unlawful is haram.
Haram. مع أن الجنابة والحدث أمر مباح. He says, so this reflect upon this, that the person who's in a state of janaba or hadath, that's not something, that is something mubah, meaning in other words, everyone will go into that stage. If you go to the toilet, you will be in a state of hadath until you do wudu. So it's not something wrong in itself, but the fact you're not allowed to then touch the Quran or do certain types of worship, he's just trying to prove that only the purified ones are rightful, deserving of being people who worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So even more so for people who are eating haram or their livelihood is from haram.
What's the word for minor impurity of person?
Hadath.
The transliteration says it here, muhdith.
Muhdith is a person who's in hadath.
Okay, yeah.
So that's the point he's trying to make, this is like outward impurity. Imagine our sustenance inside is actually, we're built upon what is haram, what's going to be our stage. فكيف بمن هو منغمس في قدر الحرام ونجاسة صحت وشبهة متى يدعى إلى خدمة الله العزيز وذكره الشريف سبحانه كلا فلا يكون ذلك. So he said that's just not possible. So you may be thinking, I see there's people in the masjid that of this category of people. You know? But just because someone goes to the masjid doesn't mean anything. Doesn't mean he's doing ibadah for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. If there's no intention, then there's no ibadah. If there's no sincerity, there's no ibadah. Many a person is praying and digging themselves further and further into the hellfire. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala protect us. You know, as the Prophet said, how many people who pray and they're only getting 1/10 of their prayer, or they're getting 1/4, or you know, it mentioned different. So depending on one's sincerity and concentration in the prayer. You know? وقال يحيى بن معاذ فهذه الطاعة مخزونة في خزائن الله ومفاتيحها الدعاء وأسنانه الحلال. As one of the scholars said, obedience to Allah, being obedient to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is one of the treasures of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It's only given to certain people, you know, it's tawfiq. And the key to it is dua, and the teeth of the key is halal. You know? So, how to get that tawfiq, how to become people who have that tawfiq, it comes from dua. It's very important, dua is very important.
You know, just on that point, we're as Muslims, we draw the line at, for example, if you earn over 40%, you get, when you receive interest from the bank, given the premise that interest is haram anyway, but you receive interest of £1, it'll get taxed at source 20%, so you receive 80 pence, but really you should receive 60 pence. So 20 pence of your income in your account is haram. However, in my case, interest, I just give to charity anyway. So take it, give it, so I don't even benefit from that. The 20 pence, I don't benefit from the charity benefits. Do I need to still declare that? That's the question. So legally, we have to declare that to the inland revenue because you've benefited from 20 pence. But I'm not the beneficiary or the recipient of that. Ultimately, it's charity. So, what I'm trying to say to you is, we can't be like the Yehudis and just enter into round semantics. We have to still declare that 20 pence, even though we're not the recipient of it. Ultimately, is that correct? Right. So if you're a high taxpayer, if you receive £1 interest from the bank, you'll receive £1 interest. Right. You'll actually receive 80 pence because 20% will be taxed at source because they play on the premise that correct. Yeah. So when the bank gives you your interest of £1, they actually only give you 80 pence. 20 pence they hand over to the taxman. Of that 80 pence that you receive, if you're a high net worth taxpayer, you will have to pay 20 pence tax on it. So you should only be receiving net of 60 pence. But the 80 pence that I receive, for argument's sake, I hand it over to charity anyway, because interest is haram.
The whole 80 pence?
Yeah, the whole 80 pence. But of that 80 pence that I handed over to charity, 20 pence should have gone to the taxman. That's my question. That's the only thing that I can think of. Okay. Will that make your income haram? So there's an onus on us to declare that 20 pence.
If you've given the whole 80 pence to charity, then why would that be issue? Because you haven't kept any of it though.
No, yeah, but they don't. I don't know. I'm just asking. I assume that they still want their 20 pence rightfully before you hand over the.
Why not give the 60 to charity and give 20 to the taxman?
Yeah, so you should. Yeah, okay.
You can do it. Yeah. If you feel that that's going to be an issue.
It's better to just not take interest in the first place, or take it and give it to charity. Better to just not take it.
Actually, the ulama said it's better to take it and give it to charity.
Okay.
Because if you don't take it in the first place, the banks will keep it. It's not like it won't exist. But you're just actually giving that money to the banks, which is not a good thing to do, you know?
Okay.
Because they're riba institutions. So that's why the ulama mainly, they say, take the interest out of your account, just give it to a charity, any charity, can be a Muslim charity, but don't expect any reward for it. So that's what they said you should do, rather than leave it in the bank, because then you're giving it back to the bank, which is not a good thing to do either.
So better to put your money into account which pays interest, and then.
No, if you had a choice, then obviously don't. But most people don't have a choice. Most banks, they will just Unless you go to an Islamic bank or something, I suppose.
But with that, just to give you context, until that opinion came out,
Yeah.
something didn't really want to disclose, but I wrote a letter to the bank saying I don't want interest. But then having now worked for a bank, their whole livelihood's based on interest. So if you tell them not to pay interest, you're just reinforcing the system. So when the ulama came out with that opinion that you take the interest and then give it to charity with the view of not getting a reward, that makes sense to me, having worked in the banking field. Now obviously my little interest is not going to make a big difference in the whole system, but it will make a difference. So for example, Hanzo Masjid, who had at one point £500,000 in their bank account, they lost out over a 5-year period, roughly, I'm just giving you just rough numbers, £50,000 worth of interest, which would have paid for salary, which would have paid for the servicing of the road, which would have paid for the toilet costs, which the ulama say for toilets and so. But they refused to take that. So that £50,000 paid for their bank clerk or teller at the, but the masjid was deprived of £50,000, and even though they would have. So for me, I just want you to qualify. Do we then, like the brother said, do we go out our way to seek high interest returns to give that to charity, or do we can actually write a letter to the bank and say we don't want any interest on our accounts? So that's
okay. Yeah. Well, the thing is, first of all, for the masjid, I don't think a masjid should keep interest. Okay. I think masjid should, if they do get the interest, give it to a different charity. Yeah. That's just my opinion for a masjid. I personally follow the Hanafi mazhab, which says that a Muslim can take interest from a non-Muslim in a non-Muslim land. That's the mazhab I follow, and I follow that opinion. That is the dominant opinion of the Hanafi mazhab, even though you may have heard differently from other people. The thing that would prevent me from putting large amount of savings if I had, which I don't have, but if I had, would prevent me putting in a high interest account would be the fact that you are putting your money into banks, which are ribawi institutions. So by putting money into banks, we're supporting them by default. Like these. Obviously, this has a big effect when you have Khaliji Arabs or people from Muslim countries. All the wealth of Muslim countries are put in Western banks or Swiss banks. You're strengthening the Western economies. This has been happening. People have been commenting on this for decades. So that what I would not do, not because actually taking interest from non-Muslims is haram in Dar al-Harb or a non-Muslim land, is actually in Hanafi madhab is permissible. But I would say it's haram from that angle, that you're actually putting money into these institutions, so then you're supporting them. If, for example, there was non-Muslims here, and you gave one of them a loan, just an individual, on an individual level, not a bank now, just an individual, you gave him a loan and you took it back on interest, the Hanafi madhab allows that in Dar al-Harb. Obviously the other madhabs don't, so if you want to take the safer opinion, you would just avoid it anyway, full stop. But what I would say is if Muslims have a lot of savings, I wouldn't put them into banks. Personally, I think, buy real estate, buy gold, invest if you feel confident. I know not everyone, can invest, or they don't have time or whatever. But if you put them in things like property, put your money into property or other things, commodities or whatever, that makes more sense to me rather than putting them into ribawi institution. And the masjid should do the same. Like if a masjid has £500,000, they should buy a couple of properties next to the masjid, And with those properties, they can rent them out to Muslim tenants, for example, have an income for the masjid. Or even invest, have someone that invests the money of the masjid into halal businesses, support local halal businesses around your area, things like that. There's no point putting it into banks.
Yeah, I agree with you, but the thing is, the thing is having, the reality is different though. I mean, like, for example, if you got anything less than £10,000 in savings, which most people tend to have under 10,000, so whether it's 2,000, 3,000, it's too less to invest in property. Yes. It's too less to invest in commodities, and if that type of money is not in the banking system, arguably, and you get caught with it without a receipt, it can be confiscated under the Terrorism Act for proceeds of crime. So I know, like, a brother who came from Dover, he had £10,000 on him. They said to him, where did this money come from? he said it was, I took it with a view to purchase a car. I didn't have the means to purchase a car because I didn't see anything I liked in Europe. They said, okay, we'll confiscate the money and we'll write your receipt. The reality, and hence why when they make these statements, they are not versed with the reality. So like I totally agree with you, but for us lot, like Joe Muslim, who doesn't have the high net worth, have the money to make that big difference, but we have enough monies. For example, I feel that my £2, if I gave it to a poor country, that would perform 5 cataract operations in the form of drops, because it costs 20 pence. So for me, that is 5 people's eyesight saved, versus leaving £2 in that way. So that's the reality. But the traditional ulama will say, just look, Allah Ta'ala has declared war, but then they don't look at the reality that we're living in a non-Muslim country. So what I'm trying to say is, do we then, based on what you've said, is we've got 2 choices. Either we can write a letter to them, either we can withdraw the money, but then the issue with that is that if it only says £3,000, we leave it in our house, there's the issue with it getting robbed. But leaving that aside, it's just going to be left underneath your mattress because it's too small amount to be invested, and if later on it gets robbed or something, you have more problems. So do we put that into a normal bank account, or a high net worth, a high interest earning account to then give the interest to charity, or do we just write a letter to the bank saying we don't want interest? Because even our Islamic banks, unfortunately, they're supported by the interest system, but it's just the money is ring fenced. So that's the question.
I don't know, I think you just have to leave it up to individuals, you know. It's just too messy, you know, the whole system's so messy. That sometimes there's no black or white, you know, it's just a grey area, like the Prophet said. Towards the end of time, no one will be free from the traces of riba, or the splatterings of it. So when we're in a situation like that, it's very difficult for me to just say to you, oh yeah, put it into a high interest account, or don't put it in a high. It's really none of them are ideal. You see what I mean? None of them are ideal scenarios. So.
See, I stopped taking interest, but then when it came to the reality that you could perform cataract operations for me, and then. But I don't want to meet Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala on Yawm al-Qiyamah.
Well, that's something like I say, definitely the ulama, there's quite a consensus that you shouldn't leave the interest into the banks. Don't give it to the banks. Don't say to them, I don't want to take interest, because it's not that there's no interest, it's just that they're keeping the interest.
No, but those same ulama say you should avoid it in the first, so they say like lesser of 2 evils if you can try not to take the interest in the first place. But I'm saying that you don't have to try, you just write a letter to them, so they won't pay you interest, so they'll really benefit from it, but they just won't be allocated, they won't be crediting your account with any interest. So again, all I'm saying is that those ulama haven't made it clear, but for me, I actively avoided taking interest, but then I realised that you're just reinforcing the system. That's my take on it, but I like an alim to qualify that opinion, so I'm not, on Yawm al-Qiyamah I can say, look, I gave my situation to an alim, and he told me this, rather than make a decision off my own accord. Otherwise I'll stop taking it. But again, my thing is that cataract operations or drops for cholera, or this little drops and stuff, they're negligible, and that money can pay for that.
Surely, I mean, it's what you're looking at is what is the best use of the spare money that you have on top of what you're learning, or what money which is left in the account. Should you take it out, put it somewhere else, or should you put it in the bank, or in current account or investment account? To me, I mean, I don't know what the situation, but lots of people, a lot of us have a mortgage. And I would say that the first thing we should do is to get rid of that mortgage. If any spare money that we have, we should get rid of the money and reduce that loan. Because that is, we are paying the interest. I mean, I don't know what the situation is, but there are lots of people who are paying interest. Paying interest and taking the interest, our first duty should be 10 pence or £10 more. I should get rid of that tax. The sooner the better. That's how I looked at it. I mean, I have wrongfully, I've kept a lot of money in the current account. I never got any interest on that. And then I realized, what the hell, why should I? Because there is a money in the account and I'm paying interest on a mortgage. So I started to get rid of my mortgage, and that is what I felt was better. But your point is valid.
No, I think your point is, like, for example, me, last year I think I earned £4.50 in 12 months, £4.50 interest. So for me it's not, But again, my thing is that for the £4.50, I know I can pay for a finite number of cataract operations. That's all it is. So that's a tangible example. If the ulama say, okay, look, write a letter to the bank, avoid the £4.50. I know my £4.50 versus $1 billion on quantitative easing is negligible. It won't even be a drop, but it is that.
Are you telling me we've had this whole massive discussion because of £4.50?
Essentially, it's haram in it. So then does that make all my income haram?
Just give me the £4.50.
It's a risk essentially. Shaykh, can I just ask please, in Hanafi fiqh, can we benefit from, we can take interest in non-Muslim land from non-Muslims?
What the Hanafi fiqh says, what the Hanafi fiqh says in al-Qaduri, لا ربا بين المسلم والحرب في دار الحرب. So for a Muslim, if they're in Dar al-Harb, which is a non-Muslim land, they can't take interest. The reasoning for that was, despite the strong, severe prohibition of interest in Islam, in the Quran and the Sahih, the reasoning for that from Abu Hanifa was because of the overriding principle of the relations between Muslim and non-Muslim lands, that we always want to put the Muslims in an advantage. We want the Muslim lands to be financially and economically as strong as possible compared to non-Muslim lands. And so that's the reasoning, which is very important to understand. And that's why people in Muslim countries, like these big billionaires or millionaires that are putting all their money in non-Muslim banks and getting interest, that doesn't apply to them. Because they're not making the Muslim economy stronger, they're actually making the Western economy stronger. And so that's where we have to really understand in depth this ruling. But yet that is the ruling in the Hanafi Madhab. That is the strongest opinion in the Hanafi Madhab. And a lot of people are really confused about it. It doesn't mean you can give interest, by the way. So it's not a hukam that allows mortgages, because in mortgage you're taking a loan but giving interest back. So it's not that, it's you can take interest from. And some quite big scholars actually have misinterpreted that sentence in Qaduri, thinking that it means both ways. There's interest is allowed both ways in non-Muslim land. But if you look at the commentaries of Qaduri, it's very clear that it's only the one way, that it's allowed to come into Muslim hands. Why? Because we want to strengthen Muslim communities and Muslim countries as well.
As long as you don't become a loan shark, bro. But yeah,
sorry, I can't give an answer sometimes. So I just can't do that. I'm afraid. You might have got elsewhere. But I can just tell you that that's what I know from the Hanafi Madhab, from the principles. How they're applied. The situation is so complex, like you said. If someone has £500 or £1,000, they can't start investing that. What they're going to do with that practically?
But I thought on the issue of Dar al-Harb, again, I don't want to digress from the text, but in keeping with the fiqh element, I thought that's no longer applicable to us, because on the maximum of the 5 things, which is we can perform nikah, we can eat halal meat, we can go to prayer openly, we can conduct our own affairs according to the Sharia. So we're in this state in between, isn't that right? So that what we see come across in Qaduri is it's not applicable to us. To us in the UK, we're able to. So Azan is now heard 4 times a day, with the exception of Fajr, because of the time it is. Is my understanding correct?
I think the ruling in Qaduri is still applicable.
Okay.
So I think ultimately it's still Dar al-Harb, even if it's in a state of peaceful coexistence. Because obviously even back in those days when Qaduri was written, you had a lot of Muslim traders going over into Byzantine lands or places, and that's why these ahkam came about, So you would have Muslims living in non-Muslim lands even at that time, and there could be quite peaceful trade, coexistence and things like that. But it's still referred to as Dar al-Harb, ultimately. Because the fiqh is very clear as well. No matter, even if you have a peace treaty between the countries, the peace treaty can't be until Yawm al-Qiyamah. It must be time limited in some sense.
So Qaduri's commentary and his fiqh is applicable to us in 2011 in London for this situation. Are you taking it?
I think it is applicable still, unless there are other reasons why people can give, why that wouldn't be the case. Because obviously fiqh does develop according to time and place. There may be other, like I mentioned about the Khaliji Arabs investing all their money in Western banks. That then becomes actually a reason for that hukum not to apply, because you're then strengthening Western economy and not Muslim countries, so that clearly breaks the actual reasoning for the ruling in the first place. I think that's what people need to grasp, the reasonings behind it, the deeper reasoning.
So what was the original reason that it's going to make Muslim country stronger?
Muslim communities and countries stronger financially, economically, if you're taking money away from non-Muslims. That's why they said it's only in a non-Muslim land. Because you can have non-Muslims in a Muslim land, but there you can't take interest from them. You see what I mean?
But does that only apply to, is that when you're taking from a banking institution, or is that you give a loan to someone as a customer?
In those days it was to do with loans. People give loans and take back on interest. It wasn't to do with banking in those days.
But then isn't that, without questioning the opinion, although I'm sort of doing it, isn't that a bit not hypocritical, but we're supposed to be ethically just?
No, it's not.
But if we're not going to take mortgages because we think
that correct me if I'm wrong, Sheikh. That ruling is it was a premise based on Muslims living in non-Muslim land. So if the Muslims were in a minority and if they had to give loans to their contemporary peers, they would earn interest of those loans. If everyone cottoned on that Muslims would give you a loan, give you money and not pay interest, then everyone would turn to those Muslims. The Muslims would be deprived of that wealth. So to not make them at a disadvantage, the fiqh allowed that dispensation to that community. So you fast forward to 2011, and this analogy now through Qiyas, and again correct me if I'm wrong, Sheikh, is if our money's in a bank account, and then so we are now left with the choice that either we take interest off it using Quduri's maxim taken from the fiqh all those years ago and apply it to it, or we take the literal interpretation of Quran where Allah declares war on those people who take interest and avoid it. But then if you take it literally, then you avoid the context and the fiqh principles around it, and that's so.
Does that answer that question?
so. But then I agree, you are bringing your position to the same level as everyone else. So you'd either just not give any loans at all, because everyone's going to take advantage of you because you're the only person giving interest-free loans.
Yeah.
So you just wouldn't give in. Or you're going to do what they're doing.
No. But that's this is what I'm trying to say. Inshallah, I'm going to not carry this on because it's not fair in the rest of the class. But what the reality is, because of now the 2011 Crimes Act, you cannot walk around with cash. And this is something that I'd advise all my brothers and that, especially Muslims. They have the right to confiscate that money until you can prove it. Otherwise, before you used to be false of innocent until proven guilty. Now you're guilty until proven innocent. And I've now firsthand had to help this brother out go through his bank statements, where they contacted his bank, went through the last 12 months bank statements, and any large amounts that he couldn't explain, they then said to him that we want that money as well, and we want that money as well. So then he got it was like a snowball effect. So the reality is, what I'm trying to say is that having large amounts of cash in your house as well is disadvantageous. And similarly, if you go to customs ports and you have over £2,000, you have to declare it to the officer, and if they find it in your belongings, then they confiscate it.
So I mean, let's say you have £5,000.
Yeah.
So I'm saying just keep it in your account rather than lending it out for interest.
Yeah.
But just as bad as them charging you interest.
No.
You're exploiting someone else.
But the modern banking says that's what you're doing in it. The reason why they're giving you interest is because they're using your money as part of 5,000, along with 1,000 people's 5,000
to lend to someone
else. So all it is that it's just a modern take on that. Hence why I said it's still.
Oh, fine. Okay. So the fact that your money's in there means it is being lent out.
Correct. Of course,
and you're getting
of course it is. So you're being deprived of that money.
Right, fine.
So the interest is to compensate you.
Yeah. Okay.
And the other thing to remember is, don't forget the other madhabs didn't agree with that at all. The Hanafi position that you can take interest from non-Muslims in non-Muslim land. So it's always going to be safer to take the position where the majority is in this case,
But even there, if you look at the hikmah of the Hanafi madhab, we managed to spread it to Indonesia, to all the furthest lands, because all of them were traders. So if you look at the other madhabs, and I stand to be corrected, again they were static. They didn't move.
True, yeah.
But Hanafis were fluid, so they went from all the Caucasus region, Asia Minor, all the way up to the Asia, and they're the most suitable for those regions. So wherever the big commerce was, whether it was Baghdad, Indonesia, or Ceylon, and all of India and Sri Lanka, where all the tea making was, Hanafi fiqh was thriving, and those people were accepting the deen. So there's hikmah behind that.
That's true. I wonder how much that was involved. Actually, that's a good point. How much that hukam helped Muslim traders, in traveling to new countries and stuff. Allah. Okay.
I'll bring in the
Sorry, I
WLSIS
couldn't
section.
answer all the questions, but sometimes there's things you can't answer as well. So I can't take that responsibility.
I'll email you later. Anonymously.
Okay. وثالث أن آكل الحرام والشبه المحروم من فعل الخير. The third reason for being careful of eating haram or doubtful things, the one who eats haram or doubtful things is cut off from doing good acts. وإن اتفق له فعل الخير فهو مردود عليه غير مقبول منه. Even if he does a good thing, then it's not accepted from him. This is what we mentioned. Remember, the people in the masjid, the front row of the masjid, praying every day, but at the same time doing all sorts of dodgy dealings outside the masjid. Yeah? This is what applies to them. غير مردود, غير مقبول, not accepted, and Allah knows best. Allah may forgive them or whatever. It's up to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It's not for us to say. But this is the danger, that they're in that situation where they're doing some good action but not being accepted from them. And yeah, just remember the previous thing about the key of obedience is dua, which I wanted to just mention is very important. And the teeth of the key is halal. So dua mukhul ibadah, the Prophet ﷺ said. Dua is the very marrow of worship, the very core of worship. Dua is the key to getting tawfiq. We make dua, sincere dua to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that He gives us tawfiq, He gives us sincerity, He makes us purify ourselves. Then we may get that thing, If we rely upon ourselves, or we think that, oh yes, I'm sincere, I can do this, I can do that, then we fall down. So it's about reliance on Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, admitting to Allah that we don't have the ability to give ourselves tawfiq, and asking Allah for tawfiq. That's the key. So always make dua. Asnanuhu halal mean, obviously you've heard some of the hadith about the person who's doing haram or eating haram or drinking haram, and then his dua is not accepted. So the dua is the key to getting tawfiq, and then making sure that we're eating and drinking halal is the key to getting our du'as accepted. Remember that hadith about the person, he's making dua, but his clothing is haram, he's eating is haram, but how can that dua be accepted? The Prophet said. فإذا لا يكون له من ذلك إلا العناء والكد والشغل الوقت. So he said, this person is in the masjid in the front row, but then he's doing all haram and his income is haram. And he has nothing from going to the masjid except for exerting himself physically and wasting his time. قال النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم كم من قائم ليس له من قيامه إلا السهر وكم من صائم ليس له من صيامه إلا الجوع والظمأ. So the Prophet ﷺ in this hadith, he said, how many people that stand to pray but they've got nothing from their standing except for sleeplessness, meaning they stand at night to pray, even tahajjud, but they're getting nothing but sahar, they're getting nothing but deprivation of sleep. There's no reward, no purification. And how many people who are fasting, they have nothing from their fast except for hunger and thirst. So may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala protect us from being in those states. وعن ابن عباس رضي الله عنهما لا يقبل الله صلاة امرئ وفي جوفه حرام وهذه هذه. And in another saying from Ibn Abbas said Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala does not accept the prayer of a man who has got haram in his stomach or inside him. وأما فضول الحلال فإنه آفة العبادة وبلية أهل الاجتهاد فإني تأملت فوجدت فيه 10 آفات من أصول هذه في هذا الشأن. So it says, as for leaving, once someone's gone beyond that point of leaving the haram and the doubtful things to eat, then also then to leave what is halal as well. Leave some of what is halal. So not to overeat, in other words. He says this is one of the destructive things for those people who are trying to make extra effort and extra ibadah. Because this is one of the things that can destroy your further progress on the spiritual path. Indulging too much in the pleasures of the stomach. He says, I've thought deeply about this and found 10 dangers in this matter. So don't forget now, this is not something he's saying which is haram, But these are for people who want to make that extra effort, make the extra coming closer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. These are the type of things they would have to do. All of us have experienced, if someone eats a lot or they drink a lot, then it becomes difficult for them to ibadat. If we eat or drink excessively before we sleep, we find it hard to wake up even for fajr, let alone for tahajjud. Because now the bellies are full. So it's things like this that are going to help in the next stage when someone wants to do more ibadat, they want to pray tahajjud, they want to spend more time doing dhikr. To have less food and drink in the stomach will help to have that energy to do those things. So inshallah we'll go into that next week. Jazallahu anna sayyidina Muhammad Jazallahu anna sayyidina Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Jazallahu anna sayyidina Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Subhana rabbika rabbil izzati amma yasifun wa salamun ala
al-mursalin. Expiation for fasting, that's only been broken apart.